things too much. We're very grateful to be hosted here, and we're going to have a terrific performance for you. We're not going to do much of the formal business meeting. We didn't really have anything on the agenda for that, and last month was another just terrific speaker who filled us in on things, but we are not really focusing this month or last month on the business aspects. So we're going to forego the treasurer's report, the minutes. We didn't really prepare that, and we'll get to that. Also should point out this is our last meeting, formal meeting presentation of 2018. We generally take December and January off, and we'll be back with a new set of programs starting in February at the same first Thursday, unless it changes. We'll announce it on the website and we'll know. If you signed in and we have your email, we'll definitely make sure you're kept apprised of what we have. So without too much further ado, let me look at my notes here so I get it right. But we have historian and performer Laurie Gaulke, who's been with us before, and we're very pleased she's back. She's presenting The Letter tonight, which is a story about one local woman's heroic actions that accidentally propel her into the national spotlight. Now, I'm not going to give anything away about it, but so you know about Laurie, she has a master's degree in cultural anthropology and in-depth research. Laurie strives to present each character historically, culturally, and socially in a very accurate manner. So this is a real history performance. Using original words as recorded in diaries, letters, and journals, and other primary sources, Laurie breathes extraordinary life into the extraordinary lives of these women. And without any further delay,
I decided before I jump into the actual performance, I wanted to give just a little sort of intro mini talk about how this even came about, because I would never have known about this woman if it wasn't for the Long Hill Historical Society. So it's probably sometime last spring that the guy in Kelly Washto approached me about researching Mary Hudspeth Benson. Anybody else heard of her besides the people that well, yes, and people, yeah. Totally ordinary woman, and they gave me this file of information on her, and there was one piece that jumped out at me, which I'm not going to tell you because that's what my show's about. But it's, you know, the Rothschilds actually live in her house, which is very cool, in Millington. Her house is still here. And at the end, I can give you a little bit more information about her as well. And I, as a social historian, I just geek out on the research. So I love going down rabbit holes. So I got a copy of this. This is just how it started. I had a copy. It's called Straighten Up. It's a March on Washington, and it actually was designed for students. So I got this off the internet, and I just got hooked about what I'm going to present tonight. And that's how I started. There's like, you know, anyway, so that was the research thing. And then thank God for Google. But I did end up hiring a researcher at the National Archives because there were a few documents which are back on that table, facsimiles. You may take a brochure, but please don't take any of my documents. So I hired her to find these documents because I just couldn't locate them. And since my personal goal is always, as Larry said, to use the person's own voice, I was lucky enough to do this. But I will say that there are two separate lives to Mary Hudspeth Benson. And while I was at first going to try to mesh everything together, it was almost like they were two separate people. It's like the before this event that I'm going to present and the after. And there's no connection between, I mean, there's connection, but there's no, when I'm researching one part, it doesn't tell about the other. It was very strange. So I couldn't figure out how to do that. So I'm focusing on this one piece that I just thought was just so cool. So I hope you enjoy it. Sir, my name is Mary Hudspeth Benson. I reside in Harlem, New York, and keep store there for the purpose of supporting myself and my 4 children, as I am a widow. I was going down to the city about the 14th of November, 1864, on the 3rd Avenue car. My daughter, my little girl, was with me, 9 years old. There were 2 gentlemen sitting in the car next to me. Whether they were in or not when I got on, I am not confident. One of them was a fine, gentlemanly-looking man, and the other was not. They were talking most earnestly. I overheard their conversation several times when the car would stop. Oh, sir, yes. And one of them said he was going to leave for Washington the day after tomorrow, and the other said he was going to go to Newburgh or New Bern that night. Oh, what a cold day that was. Not as cold as in Coburg when I was a little girl. Canada had bitter weather sometimes. Oh, that was the day that Minnie and I went down to the city to go to the brokers to deposit some gold and then on to the post office to mail some letters. We boarded the 3rd Avenue car, Minnie chattering away as usual, my mind on the errands ahead, to find myself swept up. One of the men was a fine, gentlemanly-looking man. He had the hand of a man who was never obliged to do any work. In the jarring of the car, his head was struck, and it pushed his hat forward. And I noticed that he seemed to have a wig and false whiskers on, and these were also pushed forward when his head was struck in the jarring of the car. The front of his face was darker than under the whiskers. His skin seemed to be stained with something. The other man was a large, common-looking man. He was shorter and stouter. And the gentlemanly man had a scar on his cheek, his right cheek. The man with the scar that was sitting next to me called the other man by the name of Johnson. I saw them exchange letters. The man that was sitting next to me reached into his pocket to take out the letters, and I saw that he had a pistol in his belt. They left the car at 26th or 27th Street Station, and I moved up to take their place as the car was crowded. As I was leaving, my little girl picked up a letter on the floor of the train car at the edge of my skirt. She gave it to me, and I put it into the pocket of my coat without noticing that it was not one of my letters. Now, as I was reading the letters, we were heading on down to the brokers with the gold and going to the post office. I had the letters in my pocket along with my other letters, and when we got to the brokers, I pulled out some money, and I noticed the letters in my pocket. And I put them in without noticing that they were not one of my own. I do remember that the gentleman Johnson was very angry. He was not to go to Washington, but only to be a messenger and not do the thing he so wished to do. Mama, you dropped one of your letters. Giving it to me, I put it in the pocket of my dress, as I said, and kept it there until we got to the brokers. Reaching into my pocket and pulling them out, I noticed, well, this isn't one of my letters. An unsealed blank envelope with 2 letters inside. Well, I took one out and just read over it very quickly. I was horrified. Dear Louis, the time has at last come that we have all wished for, and upon you everything depends. As it was decided before you left, we were to cast lots. Accordingly, we did so, and you are to be the Charlotte Corday of the 19th century. When you remember the fearful, solemn vow that was taken by us, you will fear there is no drawback. Abe must die. And now. You can choose your weapons, the cup, the knife, the bullet. The cup failed us once and might again. Johnson, who will give this, has been like an enraged demon since the meeting because it has not fallen on him to rid the world of this monster. He says the blood of his gray-haired father and his noble brother call upon him for revenge. And revenge he will have. If he cannot wreak it upon the fountainhead, he will upon some of the bloodthirsty generals. Butler would suit him. As our plans were all concocted and well arranged, we separated, and as I am writing, strike for your country, bide your time, but strike sure. Get introduced. Congratulate him. Listen to his stories. Not many more will the brute tell to earthly friends. Do anything but fail, and meet us at the appointed place within the fortnight. Enclose this note together with one of poor Linnea. I will give the reason for this when we meet. Return by Johnson. I wish I could go to you, but duty calls me to the west. You will probably hear from me in Washington. Sanders is doing us no good in Canada. Believe me, your brother in love, Charles Selby. My only feeling was that I had it in my power to save the life of the president, and I would do so at any personal risk. The risk was not as important as the thing to be done. I realized that I was the somebody that, having put the letter in my pocket that my daughter gave me, I kept it there until we reached the broker's office on Nassau Street. In putting my hand into my pockets to take out the gold, I took out the letters. And I opened them and read one of them and found that they related to this plot. As General Butler's name was mentioned, my first thought was to give them to him. And knowing very few people in New York, as I'd only been in the city a short while, I thought that he would probably pay more attention to them than anyone else. How important these letters were. He directed me to take them to General Dix, and I was escorted to the Hoffman House for fear of meeting the gentleman who dropped the letters in the car. I had moved back to Canada, and a gentleman, Mr. Thurston, came and asked me to come to Washington to give testimony in the assassin's trial. I suppose I was not required to come unless I wanted to come. There was no subpoena. But there were conditions made. My expenses were to be paid here and back, and I was to be given $20 a day while I was here. I thought that very little because I left my family and had to come here. Had Mr. Thurston not given me that, I would not have come. I traveled to Washington without escort and was kept 11 days away from my family and my business. But I knew it was my duty to do so. I mean, never did I imagine that my life was in danger. A widow with 4 children, a nobody. I remember after sharing a letter with General Dix, I was so wanting to save the life of the president. But sadly, my desire and my fervor to save the life of the president was in vain. From the New York Times Special Dispatch, Washington. A stroke from heaven, laying the whole of the city in instant ruin, could not have startled us as did the word that broke from Ford's Theater a half-hour ago that the president had been shot. It flew everywhere in 5 minutes and set 5,000 people in a swift and excited motion on the instant. It appears that a young man entered the president's box from the theater during the last act of the play of Our American Cousin, with pistol in hand. He shot the president in the head and instantly jumped from the box upon the stage. The audience heard the shot, but supposing it being fired in the regular course of the play, did not heed it until the screams of Mrs. Lincoln directed their attention. Shot. The sound of a pistol being fired. The screams of a wife and mother. Oh, I shudder at the memory of my own little boy, my darling boy, my beloved. Supper time. We're all gathered at the table. Where did the revolver come from? My little boy idly handling the revolver. The sudden tilt of his chair upsetting his balance, raising his head to steady himself. A shot, a scream, my baby. Oh, would that I had been able to prevent this tragedy. But I was to become a witness in this upheaval, an important witness, I was told. Yes, I did answer that advertisement from General Dix. And I did travel down to Washington unescorted, being kept 11 days away from my family. But I never did feel that my life was in danger. As a widow with 4 children, a nobody. But the $20 a day, to the Honorable Judge Advocate General. Sir, I beg to make the following statement why I am entitled to remuneration. I found the letters relating to the assassination. I was keeping store in Harlem for the purpose of supporting myself and 4 children. Was obliged to close the shop while I was attending the trial. General Dix said my cat family would be cared for while I was away, but no attention was paid to them. Upon hearing this, I communicated with General Baker, who gave me $50 to send home. I was sent home from Harlem, sent home to Harlem without any escort. Though feeling my life was in danger, I nearly lost my life by being strangled. Another time I was shot at. I heard that it was well that I had left Washington when I did, or else I would never have stayed alive. Was afraid to attend to the store. I thought as I had attempted to save the life of the president, of the leader of this country, I had a claim upon the country. I wrote to Major Eckhart begging for means of returning to Canada, which was denied me. I was consequently obliged to sell out my store at a great sacrifice, to break up my home and return to Canada and throw myself upon the charity of my relatives. Upon being sent for to attend the trial of Surratt, I was told by the counsel who came for me at the request of the Secretary of State that he thought if I laid my claim before the proper authorities at Washington, I would be handsomely remunerated. I feel that $2,000 would not be too much to claim for all that I have lost and endured. Hoping this statement will receive your favorable consideration, I have the honor to be, sir, your obedient servant, Mary Benson. War Department, Bureau of Military Justice, 5th of July, 1867. The services of Mrs. Benson in preserving and making known important testimony and in fearlessly repeating such testimony in public at the trial is, under all the risks incident to such a position, is well known. This lady had been repeatedly assailed with violence and apparent murderous intent. Threats against her life made, she was constrained to abandon her business to take refuge in Canada. She has come voluntarily to Washington to renew her service to the government and has again given her valuable testimony upon the trial of Surratt. While the amount of compensation named by Mrs. Benson, though not out of proportion to what she has actually undergone, must be regarded as greater than the government should be called upon to pay, it is the opinion of this Bureau, based upon its previous estimate of her character and conduct, that both justice and public policy require that a full and liberal award should be made to the applicant in this instant, which is accordingly recommended. Joseph Holt, Judge Advocate General. And yet another letter. September 1867. For services received in giving important information in regard to the conspiracy against the life of President Lincoln and for her expenses, $500. Letters. Letters written. Letters read. Letters exchanged. Letters dropped. Letters picked up. The President receiving the letter I sent. Attaching some importance to it, marking in his own hand assassination, and then filing it away with all the other threatening letters, to be later found and presented at the trial. I was told that throughout the war, a great number of letters were received. Letters that were queer and threatening queer acts of violence from unknown parties upon the president. And they were all filed away. It does seem that a good many very foolish letters were received of all kinds. Thank you. Oh. Finally got that one through. It's always nerve-wracking to do a brand new show. I will entertain some questions, but I want to share something. And of course, as I love the research, I only discovered this last night at 11:30. Why I didn't find this earlier, but Mary Hudspeth Benson whole link to the Lincoln assassination was the letter that she picked up, obviously, in the 3rd Avenue train car, and it is signed Charles Selby. So I, at first, made the assumption that Charles Selby sent this letter to Booth. Well, it turns out that the letter actually was written by John Wilkes Booth. Charles Selby, if anyone knows about John Wilkes Booth, he was an actor, fairly well-known actor of the time. Charles Selby was a Victorian playwright and actor. And really interestingly, John Wilkes Booth performed in Selby's play called The Marble Heart. And at the performance, Abraham Lincoln was in the audience. And Booth was playing the part of the villain Raphael. And in one of his speeches or set of lines, he knew the president was there, and he looked straight at the president and said these lines that were actually very threatening. And one of the people sitting next to Lincoln commented on this, and Abraham Lincoln replied, "He does look pretty sharp to me, doesn't he?" So that was one of the ways that John Wilkes Booth again was trying to threaten the president. But Charles Selby